So I want to introduce you to Raul Santos. He's one of 3 international strategy directors at the international team for our denomination. He focuses specifically on church development. So I invite him to come and share from his experience and his heart, and you will be blessed.
Kamloops Alliance Church, it truly is a joy and an honor for me to be here. The last time I came and spoke at this church was in 2019. And so when I came in this last few days, I walk in and I'm going, where are the green pews? But I have to say this, I love it. And I've noticed these chairs are significantly softer. For a guy like me, as my wife says, who doesn't have a lot of padding in that area, boy, this is sure helping me out, so thank you. I'd like to do a shout out to my favorite people. Of course, despite the brown skin, I am Canadian, so I want to give a big shout out to you Oilers and Riders fan out there. Sorry, when I immigrated to Canada from the Philippines in the early 80s, I landed in the city of Regina at -38 with winter I've never experienced before, and I had to fall in love with the Riders. And then I moved to Edmonton where I was married, and that's how I started cheering for the Oilers back in the days when they were winning all the cups, but I didn't really actually cheer for them until they traded the great one. And the last time they won the cup, 1990, was the year my son was born. So if you recall that game, triple overtime in Boston, and Peter Klima, who is atrocious in defense, but is an amazing stick handler, never plays for 5 periods. The third overtime they put him in, and he takes the puck all the way in and scores, and then they win the Stanley Cup, right? So since then, it's been pain. So I totally understand how you Canucks fans feel. I totally get it. No, my claim to fame here, my favorite people here are you folks, Kamloops Alliance Church, because this is where my wife grew up. I don't know if you're aware of that. I snuck in, but they took pity on me and allowed me to join the Bergen clan, Henry and Justina Bergen, and some of you do remember them still, and some of you came to greet me, they moved here in 1973, and they just moved down to the Lower Mainland in 2020. Bum has since been promoted to glory just last December 29th, but Dad's still going on down there. And so on behalf of the Bergen family, and especially my wife, Donna, I bring greetings to all of you. She wishes she could be here to greet you in person, but she has to fly to Toronto this afternoon for meetings this week, so she was not able to come and join me. I also want to give a shout out to my fellow Filipino kababayans. Kamusta mga kabayan? I know you're here. You bet. There you go. There you go. Another one of my favorite people I've been living and working in the Middle East for 19 years, been working with Middle Eastern Arabs now for over 30 years, and I just love Arabs. And so to my Arab brothers and sisters, marhaba, salam alaikum, sharafni, hububni. I'm so honored if there are any Arab speakers here. And last but not least, my grandmother is pure Spanish, and so to all of you Spanish speakers, mucho gusto, encantado. Dios te bendiga, hermano y hermana. What a joy for me to be here, all right? Well, thank you, Kamloops Alliance Church, for sending Diane, Pastor Tim, and his wife Amanda to join us for Global Gathering. They represented you well, I need to tell you that. And they were such a blessing to have with us, such an honor for me to meet them there. I want to thank you, too, for then sending them along with Chris to Cairo to minister to your North Africa team. Thank you for loving on that, on your international workers. You own every single one of your international workers. Did you know that, Kamloops Alliance Church? 160 of them scattered around the world, reaching over 35 people groups that have no access to Jesus. Every single one of the international workers, because sent out by the Alliance Canada, are your extended staff. You have ministries in all of these countries because you send them, because you give to the Global Advance Fund that allows them to minister where they are, because you pray for them, and because you are so faithful to preach Jesus right here. So on behalf of your international workers of the Alliance Canada, thank you, thank you, thank you. So, yeah. Today I want to talk about Alliance Missions. And I dare brag and say that Alliance Missions is bold, wholehearted, fierce, sacrificial. But let me ask you, when you think of Alliance Missions, what comes to mind? If you're from my generation, the millennial generation, no, I'm not. You're probably thinking of pith helmets. You're probably thinking of preaching under a mango tree beside an African river or somewhere in Asia or somewhere in Latin America. Folks, that still happens. But did you know that your international workers look exactly like you, all of you right here? Because at the end of the day, they're ordinary Canadians of all different stripes, colors, and cultures and languages who have simply said yes to Jesus and gone to where God has called them or where you as the Alliance Canada have sent them. But what marks them is the fact that they're all of these things, and that's what we're going to talk about, right? Let me read a couple of quotes. So why do we still do missions today? Well, to quote one of the modern prophets of the modern church, John Piper, he said, missions exist because worship doesn't. The reality is there are still too many people on planet Earth who have never bowed nor even know who Jesus is. And for that great picture to happen in Revelation 7, when all nations, tribes, and tongues will be gathered before the throne of the Lamb to worship Jesus, for that to accurately happen, everyone needs to hear and have a chance to either accept him or reject him. That's why we engage in missions. I read these couple of quotes from Dick Brogden. He is an Assemblies of God American international worker, and along with his wife Jennifer, they've served all over the Middle East and currently are stationed in Saudi Arabia. If you're familiar, he is also the founder of the Live Dead movement with the Assemblies of God churches. And here's a couple of things he said. Folks, missions is simply the advancement of God's glory and gospel to all of the peoples of the earth. It's pretty simple, isn't it? All the peoples of the earth, including right here in Canada, across BC, across this great country of ours, not the 51st state, but the Dominion of Canada, and all around the world, all right? And here's another quote from him, right? He says, in partnership with God regarding missions, there is a mystery. And he says, God doesn't need us. God doesn't need you and I. You agree with that? Absolutely, right? But then Dick Brogden says, and yet he chooses to need us. Folks, this is so deeply profound. The God of the universe, the all-sovereign creator, chooses to need flawed, limited people like you and I. And that's why we say yes to his call to missions. Dr. Albert Benjamin Simpson, the founder of our movement, he said that our movement stands for a commitment to reach the most neglected field, to avoid the beaten tracks of other laborers, to press on to the regions beyond, and to preach the gospel where Christ has not been named. He was simply paraphrasing what Paul, the great missionary statesman, Apostle Paul, said in Romans 15:20, when Paul said, it is my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ is not known, so that I may not build on anyone else's foundation. That is still what we do until today. That's why our focus continues to be the hard and dark places where less than 2%, and on average, less than 1% of the population still have not heard about Jesus. That's where he calls us, and that's where he continues to send us. But what does it really mean to be an alliance worker? Well, let me unpack this, because in many ways, this reminds us of Caleb. Now, you've all heard of the biblical character called Caleb, right? We first get introduced to him in Numbers chapter 13, when the Israelites, after having been miraculously saved and taken out of their over 400 years of slavery in Egypt, and then the miraculous parting of the Red Sea, and then they now have made it to the doorstep of the Promised Land. That back then, Canaan, modern day Israel, right? And before they go in, they decide they're going to send spies out to go check out the land. And Caleb is picked to represent his tribe, the tribe of Judah. And so they go. They take 40 days to sort out the land, right? To inspect it. And they come back with amazing reports about this truly is the land of milk and honey, right? If you've ever been there, and especially if you visit just to the east of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, the fertile Jordan Valley. Until today, the fruits that they brought back, clusters of grapes this big and still absolutely sweet without fertilizer. I've tasted it, I've eaten it because we used to live there. That's where we tried to attempt to study the language of Arabic in Jordan. And so this is the land. But yet 10 out of the 12 spies comes back with a terrible report. They say, no, this is a scary land that's going to eat us alive. They've got the descendants of Anak, these giants. They've got the Amorites up on the hills, and they've got these powerful military. There's no way we can beat them. And then on the hills, the Canaanites, they have these iron chariots. We don't even have one chariot. No, we're better off. We need to go back to Egypt. And a rebellion breaks out, right? The only two people who disagree with this report are, of course, Caleb and Joshua, who say, no, God has already given us this land. Let's go in and take it. We've seen what God can do. We have nothing to fear. But the majority win, and they almost try to lynch Moses and Aaron, and God punishes them, and he leaves them wandering in the desert. And if you've ever been in the Sinai Peninsula, it is exactly as described in Scripture. Absolutely barren, absolutely desolate. It's a miserable place to be. And for 40 years, until that generation who complained die off, they go just walking around in circles there, right? But we get now to the end of Deuteronomy, and they're about to go back into the promised land. It's now the new generation. And Caleb is still one of them. And so you know the story. They do go in. First, the Lord parts the Jordan River. They cross, and then the first military outpost or fortified city that they've got to conquer is Jericho. And many of you are familiar with that story. And they keep going in. And they're now conquering the land just as God had asked them to. Well, after they had beaten most of the southern inhabitants of Israel and along up in the northern hills, well, here we get to the story of Caleb in Joshua chapter 14, right? And I'm not going to read the whole chapter or whole text, which I put up here for you. So make sure you keep your finger on that and whatever device you have, your Bible. But we're just going to look at snippets of the story now, right? Well, here's the first thing we read about Caleb. Joshua chapter 14, verse 12. He says, but the context here is this, right? By this time, when he went to spy the land, he was 40 years old, all right? By the time they go back in, and they've already engaged in amazing warfare where God has won every battle for them. By this time, Caleb is 85 years old, right? That's actually what the text tells us. But here's what Caleb says in verse 12. Despite that, he says, now give me the hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. Here's this 85-year-old fella who says, no, this is not about my age. This is not about my strength and ability, but this is about the power of God. And because of him, I'm going to take this hill country for his glory, right? Folks, just like Caleb, you need to know that your international workers, first and foremost, they are bold people. They are bold people. They are willing to go where no one has ventured before. They are willing to go into dangerous places. 2016, we all heard in the news how ISIS had emerged on the scene, and they were just lightning quick taking over at that point, both Iraq and Syria. And the armed forces of Iraq, despite being better equipped, and the largest at that time standing military army of the Arab world, the Syrian army of Bashar al-Assad, failed. They couldn't stop them. And they conquered swaths of territory. Being fundamentalist Muslims, they wanted to wipe out those who were not followers of the religion, and especially they focused on the Yazidi people. The Yazidis are an ancient culture. Their roots, the roots of the Yazidi faith, are a combination of Judaism, of Christianity, and Zoroastrianism. Their main center is in northern Iraq, in what was ancient Nineveh, and particularly in the northwest of Iraq. So we saw the horrendous stories. ISIS came in, wiped out their villages in their main population center. When I first started traveling here, and I met one of the gentlemen who's from one of these camps, he told me this horrendous story, how he came home to his home in his village, and in his living room, he discovered the 25 bodies of his relatives, all killed, slaughtered, piled on top of each other. We hear the stories from young men and from especially young women who had been kidnapped and raped and pillaged and absolutely destroyed, sold like slaves and treated like property. And we saw the pictures on TV when the Yazidi people fled up their holy mountain of Sinjar trying to get away, and from there they were airlifted out to various internally displaced camps all across northern Iraq. It was to this situation that our president at that time, Dave Hearn, your pastor now, was invited to help out with an aid distribution by Samaritan Spurs. And when he was there, he came back with this conviction that God was calling the Alliance Canada to help out. So then he asked the vice president for missions at that time, our Reverend Brem Frentz, and Brem Frentz then passes this on to our level. At that time, the transition was happening. My wife and I were taking over the role of regional director, and part of our oversight included Iraq. And so we started to look about how we could land a team. And I said, first thing I need to figure out is I got to find a team leader. And it's got to be someone who's been out enough and has enough experience, because this is going to be hard work, right? And so I decided to approach my buddy Don. We went out almost just 1 year apart. He left. We deployed in 1999. He and his wife Betty deployed in 1998. But they had been serving in Poland, where God had used them powerfully to see many Polish churches planted, the closest to the Alliance in Poland. At this point, he was international church pastor, and they're about to daughter another international church in Warsaw. In his church, he had 5 ambassadors. The influence of that church alone was phenomenal. So I arrive in his living room. I'll never forget this first night, and I'm sitting down there. And I asked, Don and Betty, I said, what do you think God is telling us about Poland? We've been here 20 years. The church is strong. What's he telling us? And then I said, Don and Betty, what do you think of Iraq? Well, Don, when he first went out to Poland, and he told his dad what he was about to do, and his dad was not too happy. His dad was not a believer. His dad from Chilliwack. His dad said, but at least you're not going to Iraq. And here I am calling them now to leave the comfort and beauty and culture of Poland to move to a war-torn country where there is an active conflict going on, right? First they said no, but then they agreed they would come and visit. And when they finally did come and visit, as we were driving into the city of Dahuk in northern Iraq, close to the border with Turkey, he started to say things like, Betty, look at this. Doesn't this look like Poland when we first came to Poland? And I'm going, Poland is beautiful. Have you ever been there? It's lush, it's green. This is desert and rocky and not that attractive, to be honest, right? And by the end of that week, they came up to us with tears in their eyes and they said, we've got to come here. We've got to come here. Fast forward a couple of years, they finally land with a team, and one of their teammates is Brian and Jessica, who was connected to this church for a while as well. Well, Don is walking outside in his complex where he lives, right? And he's talking to his dad on the phone. And as he's walking, this guy who's a Peshmerga soldier comes up to him in full military uniform and then points a pistol at him. Shoots. By God's grace, it jams. Recocks it again. Shoots again and still jams and walks away. Don called me up directly after that, and you could tell he's still shaking, because who wouldn't be? And yet, Don chose to stay because he's bold. Because he knew the Yazidis still needed to hear about Jesus. Because he knew this is where God had sent our movement. And so they stayed. Folks, your international workers are bold. You need to know that they're willing to go where many of us would not even dream of. Well, what about you here in Kamloops? How is God asking you to be bold? Who is he asking you to be bold with? What are you going to do about it? Not only are your international workers bold, but your international workers are also wholeheartedly devoted to Jesus, what this is talking about. So Joshua chapter 14, verse 14, here's what it says, right? So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Actually, there's another reference a few passages before that talks about, again, how Caleb had always followed the Lord wholeheartedly. What is this really talking about? This is simply talking about that above anything else, the most important person for him and relationship for him was his relationship to Yahweh God. To put it in modern day terms, in the New Testament, Mark chapter 12, he loved God with all of his heart, soul, mind, and strength. What about us today? I'll never forget Dave Hearn, when he was still our president, and I had the privilege of serving on the board under him. He quoted for us at one of our board meetings. He said, you know, we used to say that the Alliance is about, we are a holiness and missions movement, right? But then he made a correction, which I've still held to until today, when he said, but folks, we need to remember that we were called to be holy for missions. It's not holiness and missions, but it's holiness for missions. 1 Peter chapter 1, Peter, the impetuous disciple of the Lord, this is in his letter, and he talks about how we are called to be a holy people. But what does it really mean to be holy and wholeheartedly dedicated to God? This is not about attending as many services as you can. This is not about giving as so generously to the work of the Lord. Those are all important. This is not about being involved in church ministry, but if you're not, you need to. And I would like to encourage you to consider what God is doing through this church. But holiness ultimately boils down to one thing. It is simply a day-by-day, moment-by-moment obedience to what God is asking you to do. Whether it's overseas or right here. It could be in the office where he says, go pray for your colleague down on the other desk right there. Whether it could be walking down Tronquil Street right here in the North Shore and finding one of the homeless people and saying, hey, can I help you with anything? This is exactly what your international workers do every day. They simply say yes to whatever God is asking them to do. Let me tell you the story of one of your newest international workers, Kurt and Tisha Jones. They just deployed last summer to southern Thailand, to the island of Phuket, so that they could oversee our program that provides a justice semester experience for young people for the next gen, age 18 to 28, right? And before they left in August, July 5th last year, Kurt's dad, Mark Jones, our former international strategy director for relief and development, passed away very, very suddenly at the age of 57. Heartbreaking. And we had offered to Kurt and Tisha, you know, you don't need to deploy right now. You're already on the payroll. If you need to stay to help your mom and just to grieve, because this is not easy, you stay. And yet, Kurt and Tisha said, no. God has called us to go. And we will obey. And so they went. And there they serve and live today, raising up their young son, Zeke, ministering to those who come so they could learn how to engage in ministry in anti-human trafficking and anti-exploitation in the sex industry. because they were wholeheartedly devoted to God. What about us here at Kamloops Alliance Church? Do we seek to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength? Do we seek to obey Him, whatever it is He tells us to do? Your international workers are not only bold, they're not only wholeheartedly connected, dedicated to Jesus, they're also fierce. You need to understand this. So, in the story, as we jump now to chapter 15, verse 14, it says there that from Hebron, Caleb drove out the 3 Anakites, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the sons of Anak. Now, who are these Anakites, right? Well, folks, these were the ancient pre-NBA centers of the day. They were large. Imagine Shaq O'Neal, but bigger, right? They were scary. They were fierce, fierce warriors. So remember the story of David and Goliath? It's generally held that Goliath was a descendant of the Anakites. Was 9 feet tall, massive, fierce warrior. So put this into context. If you do follow the NBA, so imagine. Do you guys recall Muggsy Bogues, who used to play in the NBA? He was 5'6" tall. Muggsy Bogues now coming up against Shaq O'Neal, 7'2" tall and over 300 pounds. In my context, this is me going up against Aaron Donald when he still used to play with the Los Angeles Rams. I would be terrified. All of us would, right? But yet, 85-year-old Caleb, he goes up there and he defeats all of these 3 and he kicks them out of the land. That is fierceness for you. Your international workers are fierce. And this is why a couple of years ago in Spain, in Europe, our folks were connected to, they discovered about this heinous crime happening. Moroccan women who had been recruited to pick strawberries from the strawberry fields in Spain, in southern Spain. But then while they're working there, somebody from the criminal organizations would come, typically another woman, and say, hey, you know, there's another way you can earn more money and support your family back in Morocco better. And of course, they all jump at this because they're so desperate. And straight from there, they get taken to a brothel. They get trafficked. And they're enslaved now. Well, Kim Peters, our area director there, who's also an incredibly gifted artist, she hears about this, and in partnership with our U.S. Alliance workers, Marcy Foucault, they begin an advocacy campaign. She begins to paint paintings, amazing paintings that depict their journey and their story. Marcy she's a writer, so she begins to write books that tells these stories, mostly children's books. But they didn't stop there. They started to meet with the government now at the highest level. End result of all of this, the government of Spain and the Minister of Labor has finally given all of these strawberry pickers legal contracts and employment so that they could help protect them from this. The gendarme, the police all across Spain are changing the way they do things so that they could protect these women more. The EU has said, no, this has got to stop. And we've got to be part of this. The U.S. State Department said, we will speak up against this and fund the stop of this. 2 ordinary women, one of them is your international worker, Kim Peters, who just said, who are we? But out of their fierceness, seeing this incredible injustice and evil, said that by the power of God, we will talk to who we need to talk to if this is what will bring change and bring safety to these women. And in the process, they get to tell them about Jesus in the safe houses. Your international workers are bold. They're willing to go where people don't want to go. Your international workers are wholeheartedly committed to Jesus. They understand they can only do this out of His strength and anointing. Your international workers are fierce. And they will meet with people in positions of authority because of who God is to them, right? But it doesn't stop there. You also need to understand your international workers are also sacrificial. And of course, the best story for this well, let me go back first to Caleb. Caleb chapter 15, right? So here he is. He's already beaten the Anakites. And then along with the Anakites, right? It says there, chapter 15, where am I here? In verse 16, here's what it says, right? I had to borrow this book from Gord Downs because I forgot my preaching Bible, and my millennial eyes are having a hard time seeing the text. So anyway, be patient with me. There you go. That's better, right? So it says here in verse 15, it says, from there so let me read from verse 14. From Hebron, Caleb drove out the 3 Anakites, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, descendants of Anak. Verse 15, from there he marched against the peoples living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sefer. This is actually what is now modern-day Hebron. The verse 16, and then he says, because there's still other people that needs to be driven out, right? He says, and Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aksa in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer, right? And folks, the point here is not that, boy, he wants so much glory for himself that he's willing to sacrifice the most precious thing to him, which is his daughter. That's not the point. The point here is that for Caleb, obedience to what God had called him to do was of the utmost importance. That he knew God would look after his daughter. That he knew the best way he could worship God was to challenge who would be his future son-in-law, Othniel, who is one of the judges, by the way, whom you'll read in scriptures after the book of Joshua, was the guy who eventually does this, right? Folks, your international workers are willing to sacrifice everything and anything, including their lives, to follow and obey Jesus. I think one of the best examples of this kind of sacrificial obedience to Jesus is one of our very first international workers, Robert Jaffray, right? What's so unique about Robert Jaffray is this. So he was born and raised in Toronto, and he was born into a very affluent family. His father actually was a senator and a business guy. His father owned, what at that time was the Toronto Globe, what is now the Globe and Mail. His father had raised him up and was preparing him to take over the family business, and had offered him everything. And yet he becomes a believer and he hears the call of God to serve overseas. And so he tells his dad, but Dad, I want to study at the Alliance Missionary Training Institute in Nyack, the training institute that was started by our founder, Dr. Albert Benjamin Simpson. His father is livid, and says, if you do this, you're cut off. And he still goes. Raises his own funds to do this, right? And then he gets deployed to China, where he's the first one to begin to understand, if we're going to plant a Chinese church, this has got to be a Chinese church that's led by a Chinese pastor, by Chinese elders, and that they're governing themselves. And he releases them. Well, God opens the door for him to start other works in Indonesia, in Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines. And he recognizes that there are no American or Canadian missionaries able to come and do these things. So he begins to send the Chinese converts to do this, right? When they were about to enter Borneo, he had also been asked to come back to the U.S. At the headquarters in Nyack, New York at that time, to become the vice president for our mission work. And he says no. And he politely but firmly refuses it, because he says, this is where I need to be, because there are still so many more people who have not heard about Jesus. And then at the same time, he asks for money. But can you send me money so we can start work in Borneo? And the head office from New York says, we don't have any money. It was the dirty 30s. Giving was low. He says, it's okay, just pray for me, I'm already here. And he starts the work. And a church is birthed eventually. He died in 1945 in a Japanese internment camp. His health was broken, but all the way to the end, Robert Jaffray sacrificially sacrificed everything, including wealth, to bring glory and honor to Jesus. My brothers and sisters at Kamloops Lions Church, your international workers are bold. They're wholeheartedly dedicated to Jesus. They're fierce, and they're sacrificial. But that same call is his call to our movement. To each one of you who are sitting on the pews today, to each one of you that call yourself a child of God and a follower and disciple of Jesus, it's that same call. He wants to endow you with boldness. He wants to draw you to himself, that everything else is forgotten. So you begin to live to be forgotten so that only Jesus may be remembered. He wants to anoint you so you would be fierce and you would face the Anakites, the giants that he has given to your church, and many of them right here in, what did I hear? The most pagan city now, second most pagan city in all of Canada. Did you know that? And he wants you to do it sacrificially so that he may bless you. What's God asking from you? I'm going to close and ask us to watch this video, which I think puts all of this together, about one of your international workers who is bold, wholeheartedly committed to Jesus, fierce, and has sacrificially given over 30 years of their lives now to this one people group in the Middle East. Watch this.
My name is Claire, and I've been serving in the Middle East with my husband Ken for the last 33 years. And for the last 28 years of that time, we've been ministering and discipling among people through our business. And our goal, or what God has put on our hearts for this time, is to reach at least 10% of our workers. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that is what the Lord put on our heart. It felt like a real stretch to us. And God's grace has enabled us to continue to disciple these people. And by his grace, we have seen those people come to faith. And I'd like to tell you about Fatma, who's one of these people. She has become a believer. Fatma is on our custodial staff at the office. And during COVID, she was one of the only workers who was able to come into the office. She had permission to come in. And this gave my husband and I an opportunity to disciple her one-on-one. We had all this time alone with her. And she began to grow in her faith. And immediately she wanted to reach out to her coworkers, her family, her friends. And Jesus has been showing up in miraculous ways, bringing light and hope in difficult times. Last fall, while working on a construction site, Fatma's husband, Victory, fell from the first floor of a building, and he broke his hips, shattered them, and 3 places in his back. We asked our Alliance family to pray for Fatma and Victory as he awaited surgery at a nearby government hospital. However, despite the initial plan, Victory was left in agony for 7 days with broken bones and a swelling body. One night during that week, a group of doctors walked into Victory's room at 3 a.m. in the morning carrying a drill. They woke Fatma up, who was asleep in a chair nearby, and they asked her to leave the room. And then they drilled through Victory's knee, inserting a screw that went in one side and came out the other with no anesthetics. Victory's screams woke the entire floor. This was an incredibly traumatic event for Fatma, who didn't know what was happening. And when the doctors walked out of the room, they turned to her and said, "Most men faint during that procedure. Your husband is a brave man." Thankfully, Victory didn't have to endure another procedure like this. And finally, his surgery was scheduled for October 4th. On the day of the surgery, I went to the hospital gardens to pray with Fatma. Her parents were there and 2 of her cousins. And as I prayed, I noticed one of those cousins leaning in, listening intently. And when we finished, he could hardly contain himself, and he announced, "Did you know I have visited every church in my city? I am so interested in Jesus." We had no idea that God had already been working in this man's life and in her family in this way. It was a wonderful surprise. But it wasn't the only one that day. I also had the opportunity that day to pray with Fatma's mother. And as I prayed, I sensed the Holy Spirit in a special way. Later, I learned that she felt this too. This was an encouraging thing, but there were more surprises yet to come. The surgery lasted 10 hours and involved 18 doctors. Very soon afterward, the hospital sent Victory home, saying that if he stayed, he would surely catch an infection. Victory was sent home with instructions not to move until his next checkup over a month later. The day after Victory left the hospital, my husband Ken and I visited them in their home, and we had barely taken our first sip of tea when Victory leaned in and said, "Your people came to me." "Our people?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "7 of them." I was intrigued and I asked him to tell me more. He went on to say that on the night before his surgery, Fatma was asleep beside him on a pull-out couch, and he was unable to sleep because he was in terrible pain. When suddenly the curtains were drawn back and 7 men walked into his room. As these tall, radiant men walked into the room, they were followed by a beautiful aroma, something he had never smelled before in his life. He said it was the most incredible smell. And their clothing, he said, it wasn't just white, it was shining white. A couple of them were older and had white beards and white hair. They sat to Victory's right, and 4 of them sat to his left. And then they began to speak in a language that he didn't recognize. He'd never heard those tones before. They had a conversation about him. He knew it was about him, right over him, but he didn't understand what they were saying. Eventually, they all got up, and the first one who entered the room was the last one to leave. Before he left, he came over, walked around Victory, and put his hand on his leg and squeezed his knee, the one where the screw had gone through. And Victory says, "I felt him squeeze it." And then all the pain vanished. It was completely healed. And with that last man followed the others and left the room. Victory described a feeling of peace and joy that he had never felt before in his life. And for the first time since the accident, that night he slept through the night. He didn't need his regular 2 hours of pain relief. The next morning, as they awaited surgery, Fatma was crying out in fear, especially when the doctors told her that he probably wouldn't make it through the surgery. But Victory assured her, "I'm going to be all right." And he felt complete peace and no pain. As Victor reflected on this experience, he told Ken and me that the men he saw were your men, 7 of them, 7 of your people. And with tears in my eyes, I told him, "Victory, those are your men too." Victory nodded and he placed his hand on his heart. I was inspired and I opened my Bible and I read Revelation 1 to him. And after hearing the description of Jesus, Victory exclaimed, "Yes, yes, that's him. That's the one who touched my leg." And while this conversation was happening, Fatma's mother was in the room. After hearing Victory's testimony and the Bible reading, she asked if I would join her in the kitchen. And once we were there, she told me, "Claire, something happened to me that day you prayed for me in the hospital garden." And she asked if I would pray with her again. I knelt on the floor beside this sweet woman and I prayed for her, as did her daughter, Fatma. The prayers that Fatma prayed were heartfelt and beautiful. And that night, those same 7 angelic beings appeared to Fatma's mother in her dream. The next morning, she described them in great detail to Fatma. "One of them came towards me," she said, "and gave me a bowl, and I didn't know what was in it, but I received it from him." She went on to compliment Fatma, her daughter, saying how beautiful her prayers were and how she expressed a desire to pray like that. She asked Fatma to teach her. I told her, "I don't know what was in that bowl, but it looks to me like it was faith and hunger that was given to you." And since that day, Fatma's mother has been reading the scriptures with her. Those first few days, they read it every night together while she was living with them. And she's been drinking it all in with huge openness and hunger. Victory, meanwhile, continues to tell his story of the man in white to anyone who will listen. Fatma admits that her husband has not only been healed spiritually or physically, but also spiritually transformed. His change is so drastic that neighbors and family friends marvel and they ask questions like, "What kind of people are praying for you?" These discipling relationships have led to many other conversations with Fatma's family. The Father is drawing more and more of Fatma's family to him. Lives are being changed one prayer at a time, one scripture reading at a time. We're so thankful for these divine appointments and the opportunity to partner with Jesus, the man in white in the Middle East.